Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, many papers are already telling us they know the result of the election and are using polls. And again, we've got front pages, very contrasting front pages here, interestingly. There's the Sunday Express. 1 in 7 Labour voters turn Tory. They just get up first thing in the morning and they suddenly realise they've changed. Extraordinary. There's the Mail on Sunday, however, saying that the Tory lead has been slashed in half after their U-turn on pensions and other policies as well. Then the Sunday Telegraph has Patrick McLaughlin, the Tory chairman, not surprisingly perhaps, attacking Corbyn as a terror risk to the UK. The Sunday Times has Theresa May parking her tanks on Labour's lawn with a series of policies designed to appeal to Labour voters. And then finally we've got The Observer there. Very interestingly, The Observer are bigging up Tim Farron and the Liberal Democrats, and I wonder whether, as a big Remain or anti-Brexit paper, they will in fact end up going for the Liberal Democrats rather than the Labour Party this time. We'll see. Anyway, brilliant paper reviewers in front of us, and we're going to start off, I think, Sarah, with a big Sunday Times, the kind of long reads that you turn to on a Sunday morning in a moment like this. You do, and obviously the papers are full of marathon headlines. This one is "The Lady is Going for Gold," and here's a nice balanced cartoon of Theresa May and striding ahead, yes, Jeremy Corbyn. But this is Tim Shipman, who is very good on the sort of inside track, and he is very interesting on Theresa May's extraordinary control, at least for her own cabinet, of course, most of whom had no idea that she was going to call this election. And some of whom may be on a sticky wicket if she wins, we read as well. Absolutely. And so just to sort of show the relationship between her and her cabinet, slightly reminiscent, I think, of, was it Margaret Thatcher, who used to refer to her cabinet as the vegetables. And here we have Tory MPs have taken to referring to their female boss as mummy. It's all slightly unsettling, making this kind of... It's the smack of firm government does something to the Tories. But and I have a sort of personal interest in this, that it is said one thing she's doing is trying to sort of fell her former foes. So George Osborne, my successor at London Evening Standard, it says here, when one journalist suggested to May that 5% of the decision was based on wanting to watch Osborne make a tough decision about whether to give up his seat, they said, "You think only 5%." Were you surprised, as the sitting editor of the Evening Standard, because he contacted you slightly too late for the first edition, I think, when he'd made up his mind? It was fine. It was fine. Yeah. All right, let's keep moving. Kevin, you've got the front page, as I said, of the Sunday Times. Theresa May trying to pick policies which she thinks will appeal to Labour voters. Absolutely, and one is energy bills capping, which the Conservative government, when it was a Labour idea under Ed Miliband, thought it was a terrible interference in the That's right. This was, in the energy market. This was rank socialism when it was Ed Miliband's idea. And occasionally communism. I dare say the Sunday Times was against it, but now they seem to be more in favour and going to come up with an idea of variable tariffs, capping increases regionally. I'd like to see how this is going to actually work to £100. Now, the interesting, they've come out with this, and it's in the Sunday Times, because she had a sticky couple of days over tax, with the Chancellor, Philip Hammond, saying or suggesting they were going to drop the David Cameron triple lock, no increases. Because he very much wants the freedom to be able to raise taxes if that's the right thing to do economically. That's income tax, VAT and national insurance, as we saw in his budget. So she's got this problem. Elections are unpredictable. It's a long way to go here. We don't know what's going to happen, but you can see they're now coming up with a consumer offer, because she says, look, we are the low-tax party, ignoring the fact that the tax take is at a 30-year high. And so she's come up with something, but will it work? Your mucker Nigel Nelson has an interview with Jeremy Corbyn in the Mirror, Sunday Mirror there. What's the top line? He does. Well, actually, Jeremy Corbyn comes across as very confident in it to win it, and he's often diffident, and he doesn't like to talk about himself as a Prime Minister. But here he says he is up for it. Any increases in tax from Labour will be on the very richest, which he seems to think aren't just those over 70 to 80,000, as John McDonnell, the Shadow Chancellor, said, but he's looking at corporations and the very, very rich. But he is here up for the fight, which he hasn't always appeared. And you can see he needs to be, if you look at the polls, and we shouldn't be obsessed by polls, but they are a guide.
Well, in the Sunday Mirror, the poll they have, Comres, shows the Conservatives on 50. It's the highest for the Conservatives since 1991, the highest of any party since Tony Blair 2002. Labour on 25. If this election race was in an athletic stadium, Theresa May would have lapped Jeremy Corbyn at the moment. But the Sunday Times, 23, but 11, as you say. We should always remember 6 or 7 weeks of hard campaigning. Anything can happen at this point.
Absolutely. Benedict, we're going to be talking about your elections at home in a moment. But first of all, cabinet ministers who might be a little bit, ministers generally who might be a little bit worried if Theresa May gets a big majority.
That's right, because it seems that she may go on a shopping spree, according to The Sun, and heads are set to roll. If she really wins big, then more big beasts could go, including, apparently, the Foreign Secretary, Boris Johnson. So if she gets that landslide victory, which obviously she is gunning for, but there are all kinds of people like Andrea Leadsom, who, of course, could have been the Prime Minister had that race gone ahead, but that didn't happen. Sajid Javid, Liz Truss. So various people, perhaps even Liam Fox.
People they've been very much prepared to put out onto sofas and chairs like this over the last year to speak for the government, but clearly haven't performed well enough. It's very interesting, Sarah, because the one thing we don't really know yet is exactly what kind of Prime Minister Theresa May would be if she was able to be unbound and herself and her own mistress, as it were. We don't know what she'd do really over Brexit. We don't know what she'd do in terms of domestic policy, do we?
She has remained absolutely inscrutable. But so it's a sort
Tory
of act
conference.
of faith. It's trust me, Theresa. And so the Mail on Sunday does. Normally there's a convention in elections that you wait a little bit and say, we hope that they'll perform. We'll see what their vision is. But the Mail on Sunday is just cutting that out and going straight for vote for Theresa May. Kevin suggested it was to beat the Daily Mail on this, but...
great rivalry in British journalism between the editors of the Mail on Sunday and the Daily Mail.
They could be spinning there, couldn't there? I mean, it could be, let's lessen the expectation, but actually, while gunning for a landslide. So
well, yes, except that
could be disinformation.
These ones have no doubt at all. The Mail on Sunday says, vote Theresa May. And there's another cartoon. The cartoons are very sort of telling that, so we've had her winning the marathon, and here we have her at St George, so it goes on.
Just before we take a big deep breath and swim our way across the channel, one other aspect of this election is the Liberal Democrats and the sort of suggestion that there will be some kind of grand pact for Lib Dems and others to stand down against each other, a kind of anti-Brexit pact. I'm highly sceptical about this, but the Observer seems to be quite interested.
It is very interesting that I guess the Liberal Democrats have got burnt before about coalitions that their voters don't like. So, but it did seem to be quite an interesting sort of mathematical coalition that if you just went for the pro-European, you could start to get the numbers. So it is interesting that Tim Farron is saying no. What do you think about that?
I think it's impossible to organise at this late stage. It would have been hard enough anyway. But it's where you put your resources into seats. Do Labour really challenge in Liberal Democrat seats? Do Liberal Democrats really challenge in Labour seats?
But the South West is going to be a big thing.
And the role of Brexit in this will be very interesting, because I think it's a really tough job, not just for leaders of campaigns, but also for pollsters. And I wonder how much that is really impossible to predict.
Absolutely fascinating, trying to watch people predict what's going to happen. Benedict, can we remind viewers that the French elections are in 2 stages. So you have round 1, where you have a lot of candidates, and it's whittled down to 2 finalists for the second round. It's been said that in the French elections, you vote for who you want to win in the first round, and you vote against who you're most frightened of in the second round. And the question here is, there are 4 people, are there not, who might make it to the second round?
There are. We have 11 presidential candidates in this particular presidential election. 4, very surprisingly, seem to be in with a chance of making it through to the second round. So not completely unexpected, according to the polls, to have Mr. Macron, Emmanuel Macron, former finance minister.
We call him the Blairite. I mean, it's a very Anglo-centric way of looking at him, but he's the sort of centrist, fresh face. He's got a new party called En Marche.
Only 39 years old. It might not register that loudly in this country, but by French standards, that is astonishing. What is even more astonishing is that he is campaigning as a centrist, having been in the socialist government, and saying he's not from the right or the left, because what is needed are actually solutions that fit the country. We've got Marine Le Pen, who we think that that's most likely to be the 2 contenders.
The National Front. You've got a hard left.
With Jean-Luc Mélenchon, the most surprising in the last few weeks,
and you've
rising
got Fillon,
up.
who is the
beleaguered centre-right.
Now, who do you think is going to get through? Sorry to give you Ben.
No, fair enough. Well, OK, I think we may be in for Macron, Le Pen, but the fact is I do not know, and millions of people, and in fact the best political heads in France don't know. It's in the hands of the French people, but what is certain is that whatever happens, this is a crucial election for France, B, just as importantly, a huge election for the EU. Because if Madame Le Pen were to become president, for example, that would have significant effect on France, a referendum, also its position in the EU. If Mr. Mélenchon got through, he's very anti-EU as well.
So there's lots of potential upsets there. What strikes me is that if it's Macron versus Le Pen in the second round, then he doesn't really have an ordinary party, and we're not absolutely sure whether he can get the votes out in numbers. Le Pen has a very formidable, old-fashioned vote-gathering machine in the Front National, and is there therefore not a danger that if Macron makes it against her, she then wins on the second round?
Yes, that is indeed. Some would qualify it as a danger, others would qualify it as a hope, and they'd be quite happy because... but the fact of the matter is, if we are dealing with, in the end, a Macron-Le Pen, this will be astonishing for another reason, Andrew. It will mean that neither of the two main parties, this is unprecedented, either the Socialist Party candidate who's polling appallingly, Benoît Hamon, 8%, we'll see obviously what happens tonight, and it would mean that Marine Le Pen also, she isn't the centre-right. So we have a complete meltdown, not just of the Socialist Party, but actually of the whole political landscape in France. I should just say, because there are two rounds, there's what are called a Republican pact, and normally don't undermine or certainly underplay Macron's chances because people
everyone
often
will pile into his camp to
vote
stop
for the
Le Pen.
person, yes, to stop Le Pen.
Now, there is one other political story, for reasons which will become shortly apparent, that I'd like to discuss, which is that UKIP have a story, I think, in the Sunday Express,
they
talking
do
about banning the burqa.
They do ban the burqa for Paul Nuttall's sake. They're going to ban caps, but they're going to ban face coverings if they win the election. It'll be in their manifesto. But of course, it's very inflammatory. I don't think you set people free with bans. There are very few Muslim women in Britain who wear the burqa or the full face veil. In fact. There's been, it's probably the route now. UKIP are going to go down after Brexit and become very much an anti-migrant.
We can discuss all this shortly.
But it will put it in line with France, Belgium, and also Bulgaria.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a spread.
I'm not sure we
I'm
want
not
to
sure
follow
about the last one.
And the fact that Paul Nuttall's written a piece in the Sunday Express, and usually for him, he's not as certain as normal. There's 8 question marks, but he does suggest that UKIP may not run candidates against some of the Brexiteers, Anne Main, a Tory in St
We'll
Albans.
talk about that as well.
And Kate Hoey in Vauxhall Labour.
Now, just before we finish, Sarah, you're about to take over the Today programme on BBC4. Have you planned for major shake-ups? Exciting new presenters?
I'm going to arrive and learn, I think, is the George Osborne line. Yes, that I'm taking.
Very, very sage and sound. All right, thank you all very much indeed.
Let's take a look at what's on the front pages this morning. The Sunday Times says the Conservatives will cap energy prices, saving families around £100 a year if they win the election. The Sunday Telegraph quotes their campaign chief, Sir Patrick McLaughlin, who says the UK wouldn't be safe under Jeremy Corbyn. Now, there are plenty of polls flying around today, as you'd expect, and the Sunday Mirror reports on one which puts the Conservatives on 50%. That is their highest rating in 26 years. 1 in 7 Labour voters will switch allegiance and vote Conservative. That's according to the Sunday Express. But the Mail on Sunday has a different story, saying Theresa May's lead has fallen to 11% after a row over tax and pension plans. And The Observer leads on an interview with Lib Dem leader Tim Farron, who emphatically rules out a coalition deal with any of the other parties. Now, joining me to talk about all the big stories are the author and journalist Lucy Wadham, technology entrepreneur Scott Fletcher, and the chief leader writer for The Observer, Sonia Sodder. Thank you very much for being with us this morning. Lots to talk about. A lot has changed in the last week. It feels like we've got to start with the election, which is in all the papers, as you'd expect. But the Sunday Times in particular, Tim Shipman, their political editor, saying the lady is going for gold. It's a sign, he says, that this is her seizing control of politics in the UK and also strengthening her hand in Brussels too. So it sounds like a glowing recommendation there, really.
I actually thought this was about the marathon today, actually, with the caricatures. Very, very nice looking piece.
I don't think we're going to see the Prime Minister jogging jogging along in the marathon, Scott. Yeah, I think this is a really interesting sort of behind-the-scenes take on why and how the election got called. So some quite good nuggets in here. First of all, the secrecy that was around the election being called, and it was quite phenomenal, really. So May decided that she was going to call the election when she was on an Easter walking holiday, got back, informed her 2 closest advisors, and then you had lots of cabinet members, not shadow cabinet, not there yet, sitting around the table, really surprised that an election was called. So that's quite phenomenal.
It's amazing it didn't leak as well. You'd think that journalists would have got a bit of a sniff of it.
I know, but it just shows you how tight the Theresa May operation is.
Exactly what I was going to say, yeah.
Yeah.
An interesting bit here about Osborne. One journalist suggested that maybe it was a 5% of the decision to get Osborne out of his seat. And somebody said, you think only 5%? So, yeah, interesting on that one. I mean, I live up in Tatton, and it'd be interesting to see who takes his place. Yeah,
that would be a really interesting one too. I'm slightly disturbed by this quote here. Tory MPs have taken to referring to their female boss as mummy.
I found that incredibly disturbing as well. I mean, what a nickname. I know, it's just a bit... Ooh,
really not sure about that at all.
Yeah.
Now, we've got loads of polls in the paper as well. Some quite extraordinary polls, really, showing the Conservatives' lead. Do we trust polls anymore?
Well, I do, and to the extent that, you know, we know they got the 2015 general election wrong, we know they got Brexit wrong too, but when you've got poll leads of this amount, really, you know, some polls putting the Tories on a 20-point lead, some on 25 points, you know, it's really a stretch, I think, to think that they're so wrong.
How you can say you trust them. I think now they use polls to change the psychology of the electorate. You've got the Mirror saying there's a massive lead of 25 points, and you've got the Mail saying 11%. And is that about getting the electorate out to vote, maybe?
Yeah, that is quite... The Mail one, I think, is actually quite interesting, isn't it? Because really that is benefiting the Conservatives, isn't it? By saying that, you know, you need to get out and vote, you can't be complacent because the lead's been...
And I think the Conservatives have actually got something to fear here. It's interesting. I think the tactics they're using are quite similar to 2015, and Theresa May has already appointed Linton Crosby, who ran David Cameron's campaign. So they're really going quite hard on, you know, personality politics. They're saying it's going to be a coalition of chaos if you vote for Labour or the Lib Dems. Now, the problem with that strategy is that we know that the voters from the polls have kind of already dismissed the idea of Jeremy Corbyn as being Prime Minister. So I think the Tories are getting a little bit worried about expectations being so high. Does that mean people will stay at home? But I don't think it's going to be enough to make a difference in the election.
Tax will be the interesting subject, because she's trying to dismiss that at the moment. But, you know, that's what won the last election for the Tories.
Do you think?
I believe so, yeah.
Well, tax, I think it sounds like it's going up whoever's in power, doesn't it? That's the...
Well, we're all at that stage of accepting that now, but yeah, maybe she's won that argument.
But what's interesting is the Sunday Times front page talks about her pledge to cap energy prices as well, which was what, you know, my old boss, Ed Miliband, I used to work for, one of his policies. So I think it is interesting. There's definitely a bit of a grab for the rhetorical centre ground going on.
Yeah, you can definitely see that. Now, it's easy to forget that there is another election going on at the same time, of course, which is the French elections. Here is a piece in the Sunday Times saying about how France is in a state of anxiety and that terror is really the thing that's kind of looming over the French elections, because of course we had that appalling attack in Paris very soon before the election. Lucy, do you think that's something that could really sort of affect the votes here?
I do. I mean, I'm sitting here. The reason I've been so quiet until now is that I've been living in France for the past 30 years and have only recently returned to Britain. So, you know, this is my sort of area of special interest. And this election is significant, particularly because the French, the future of Europe hangs in the balance, and the French may well vote for an anti-European parliament, which could lead to Frexit and...
Frexit, like what you did there.
And, of course, all Theresa May's best-laid plans could be scuppered. That her intention, I think the quote here, one of her close aides talked about, we're doing it so the Europeans don't have us over a barrel in 2019. You know, if France does exit, the whole thing will be up for discussion.
Well, the scary thing, I mean, you said earlier, 1 in 3 French voters don't know how they're going to vote, even today.
Yes.
You know, which is a scary thing. Will they not vote? Will they make the decision at the ballot box.
Very difficult to tell.
And this could mean, this could mean instability in Europe. It could mean, massive impact on Brexit, I think. So, the next couple of weeks are going to be interesting.
Do you think the French are living in a state of fear at the moment?
I think they are. I think but the anxiety is runs deeper than just terrorism. There's an anxiety about French identity, and I think that one of the reasons why the outcome of this election is so uncertain. Will it go to the far-right leader Marine Le Pen? Will it go to the centrist Emmanuel Macron? Or will the far-left Jean-Luc Mélenchon take it? All three are possible. And I think the French have always built their identity on great ideals: liberty, equality and fraternity.
Think back to the revolution, don't you?
Exactly. And these great ideals, the problem is the gap between these ideals and the reality for example, ethnic minorities, for the rural poor. There's a huge gap, and that is what is being expressed in this election.
One way or another, that's nationalism, isn't it? Whether it's the left or the right, exactly. And that becomes a Frexit at some point, whether whichever way that goes.
Yeah.
Well, talking of those great ideals, let's talk about Labour's new policy. 4 new bank holidays a year. Sorry, pledged by Jeremy Corbyn. Sounds like a vote winner, doesn't it?
Well, I'm sure it's going to be. I'm sure if you polled it, it'd be incredibly popular. But I think 2 things about this. First of all, Jeremy Corbyn's got an awful lot of popular policies now, and they don't seem to be making any difference to his poll ratings. And that, of course, is exactly the same position that Ed Miliband found himself in before the 2015 election. He had lots of popular policies, but popular policies do not a Labour Prime Minister make.
Although if they get nicked by the Conservatives,
well, if they get, they can do quite well. But the other thing is this just smacks a little bit of desperation, perhaps, dare I say. 4 new bank holidays, trying to bribe the electorate.
I think it's very sort of left of centre command and control politics. Actually, why bank holidays? Why not make the minimum, the legal minimum, which is currently 20 days, 24, 25, and let employees decide when they take their leave? I think to say to business you've got to shut down for another 4 days is a ridiculous policy.
In France, they have lots of bank holidays, don't they?
They do. They have 11. And if they fall on a Thursday, everyone takes Friday off. And so there's a culture of bank holidays in France. And I don't think, I'm in favour of them, because I don't think it makes people, the French don't work less hard, I think, than the Brits do.
I would suggest their economic policies aren't quite what they are in the UK. I mean, here it says, I don't know if this figure's right, but it costs the economy 2.3 billion a year for each bank holiday that we take. So that's 10 billion.
Happiness, those bank holidays, and you've got a bit of spring barbecue or something, surely?
Well, we can go full circle with the happiness. The marathon's being run today for the 9 charities. I think that's a great thing. And happiness indexes are all great, but we need to run the economy in the right way.
They're also at completely the wrong time of year, that we've already got kind of lots of bank holidays in the first half of the year, and Jeremy Corbyn's proposing another 2 in March. Well, we normally have the Easter bank holiday in March, so it's a bit maybe not the best.
Maybe
well thought.
Dark winter nights or something is when we need a bit more time off. Thank you very much for all your thoughts on today's newspaper stories.
Lots of speculation about what might be in manifestos, lots of polls and some pretty heavy attack lines, including here in the Sunday Telegraph. Tory chair Patrick McLaughlin says Corbyn puts UK at terror risk. Well, the Labour leader has been out defending himself. He says he wouldn't press the nuclear button first, and he's offering us not 1, not 2, but 4 bank holidays. We've also heard from Tim Farron, who we'll be hearing from later today as well. He's saying in The Observer that the Lib Dems won't do coalition deals with either the Tories or Labour, which probably makes sense because he wants to try and appeal to both sides. Now, there's already talk of a Tory landslide, and we haven't even started the campaign. So let's begin with an all-important caveat. Remember this. That was the polls going into 2015, and that is what actually happened. As we know, the Conservatives won a majority, and here is how the polls got it wrong. Labour, in fact, got almost 3 points lower than expected. The Tories almost 3 points higher. Some say there was a shy Tory effect. Well, Labour will be hoping that there is an army of shy Corbynites out there. Robert.
Well, I'm delighted to be joined by my political chums, Michael Gove of the Tories, Liz Kendall of Labour. Liz, if I could just start with you. We had that historic vote last week to dissolve Parliament. Lots of people have been saying to me, why didn't Labour vote against in that initial vote and then force the Prime Minister to hold a vote of confidence? Because the sight of a Prime Minister standing up at the dispatch box and saying, please vote to have no confidence in me, well, that might have been a rather better start to an election campaign for Labour.
I think we've got to get off discussions about process and on to
Really?
the issues. Yes, I do, because there's a big choice facing people at this election. A choice about the future of the country, what kind of Brexit
It is
you
about
want.
putting pressure on the opposition, and your opposition, I mean, obviously the government in this case. Why let her off so easily?
Because I'd like to see a Labour government and not a Tory government, because I believe Labour stands up for the majority of people in this country. We've got to get onto the issues that matter to the voters, I think, and stop talking about the past.
OK. As I say, that will come as a surprise to lots of people who talk to me, as it were, that Labour, as I say, seems to be giving Theresa May pretty much all she wants in this campaign.
Bring on an election campaign, because we want the Conservatives out.
Now, what's been dominating the papers over the last 2 or 3 days is the refusal of first the Chancellor and now the Prime Minister to say anything about what the Tories would do when it comes to tax. In the last manifesto, there was this so-called tax lock, a promise not to put up income tax, VAT, national insurance. Do you think that kind of commitment needs to be made in the next manifesto?
And if I were the Prime Minister or the Chancellor or advising them, I would want to have the maximum freedom of manoeuvre on that, because I think that in dealing with the deficit and in making sure that we have economic confidence in this country, then I think they need to have a free hand. But there's another point as well, which is that both Theresa and Philip Hammond came into politics with the intention of bringing taxes down over time, particularly on the backbone of Britain, on people on average and below average incomes. And the key question, if you're worried about taxation, is who do you think is more likely to keep taxes low? Theresa and Philip, or Jeremy Corbyn at the head of a coalition of chaos, relying on the SNP and Tim Farron to keep him in power? And the question, obviously, has only one answer.
So just to be clear, though, because you're confident, as it were, of the direction of travel, you don't think that she needs to put any kind of pledge about taxes in the manifesto?
Not with the degree of specificity of last time round. I expect that what we will have is a broad economic picture, which is not just about tax, it's also about fixing some of the broken markets in this country. Energy markets, housing markets. People want not just a degree of guarantee of economic stability at the centre. They want a Prime Minister who will ensure that the way in which the energy market operates is reformed, the way in which the housing market operates also changes as well.
Yeah, earlier in the programme, we asked what Ed Miliband might be thinking about that Theresa May promise around energy bills. Now, we have heard from a key advisor to the former Labour leader, Tom Baldwin. He said the policy was described as communist, and he also said it was key in the election. Look at this tweet. Business saw this kind of market intervention as a bigger threat to its future than Cameron's pledge for a referendum. So clearly he thought that that had a huge effect in 2015. Now, remember, we did say we were going to be cautious about the polls, but we're not going to ignore them completely, because there is an interesting trend. And look at this exclusive ICM poll for us. I'm afraid bad news for Labour there. 22 points behind the Conservatives. That is the biggest gap that ICM has ever seen. Now, there's many weeks to go, but if it is still like that, what will it mean for the Labour Party? Here are the constituencies across the country. It looks a little bit funny because they are all equalised in size. If Labour were to lose, as the projection would on that poll rating, 70 of its most marginal seats, this is where they would go from. You see lots there in the northwest, some around London. But what would the party look like? Who would be left in terms of MPs? Would they be more left-wing, more supportive of Corbyn? I can tell you that our analysis shows the answer is no. 69% of MPs left would be among those who opposed Corbyn in that leadership challenge last year. They won't be happy with him, but will members who voted for him en masse change their mind? Robert.
Liz, obviously from your point of view, not great seeing such a huge Tory lead in those polls. How worried are you about your own seat? I mean, you've got a 20 percentage point lead over your, in terms of the last election result. But actually, on that kind of swing, you could go.
No. I never take any vote for granted. We've been out canvassing and campaigning, and I am under no illusions about how tough this election is going to be. And I think the challenge for Jeremy and all of us in the party is to show how we will provide strong leadership, how we will stand up for the majority of people, unlike the Tories who back the privileged few, and how we can set out a clear alternative, both on Brexit and on the economy and public services. And it was very interesting. Can I just say, canvassing yesterday in an area where there'd been voters who voted both Tory and Labour. You know, I spoke to a guy who runs a small business, very worried about Brexit and the customs union and tariffs. His wife, who worked for the FE sector, who's worried about her job, and their university children who are coming out with big debt and have not got a hope of getting on the housing ladder. Those are the messages. It's going to be about both those issues, and I think we have a very strong offer on all of those points.
Liz, you never wanted Jeremy Corbyn to lead you into a general election. Do you want him to be Prime Minister?
Yeah, I don't think it's any secret, Robert, that I've had my differences with Jeremy in the past.
Do you want him to be Prime Minister?
But I absolutely want him to get a Labour government, and I will do everything that I can.
You haven't said the words, I want him to be Prime Minister.
I want to have a Labour Prime Minister, and I will do everything I can to support Jeremy and the entire Labour team in the next 6 weeks. I want to see every single MP, Labour MP returned, and I would like us to be winning back seats too.
Do you believe this lead that the polls are showing?
No.
So what do you think you will end up? Where do you think we'll end up?
I don't know. I mean, I think Liz makes a number of valid points. The first thing is that we can't be certain this far out how the election is going to develop. Also, over the course of the last year, nobody, well, very few people, predicted that Donald Trump would be our president in America, that we would have...
So you think it is a realistic possibility that Jeremy Corbyn will be the next Prime Minister of Britain?
I think MPs like Liz will say... obviously, Liz is loyal in public and all the rest of it, but...
I say nothing different in public that I do in private,
there'll be
lots
of good MPs like Liz who will say to people in Leicester or wherever, look, Jeremy Corbyn's never going to be Prime Minister. Vote for me as your local MP. And the danger is that enough people will think, yeah, he won't make it, and we'll vote for Liz, or we'll register protest votes.
You're worried about complacency, are you? You think these polls are bad for you?
Well, I think take every poll with a pinch of salt. And absolutely complacency is a mistake.
Well, look, don't go away, because we've got a few messages and we'll be back quite soon.